October 6, 1973. As the sun sank behind the volcanic ridges of the Golan Heights, a calculation was about to be tested not on paper, but in fire. Inside a hardened command bunker in Damascus, Soviet military advisors stood silently along the walls. Maps covered the tables. Red arrows surged forward. The numbers spoke clearly. 1,400 Syrian tanks. Facing them, barely 100 Israeli tanks scattered across broken, hostile terrain. To Moscow, this was not just another war. This was a live experiment. For years, the Soviet Union had armed Syria with its doctrine, its steel, its belief that mass was destiny. The T-55 and T-62 tanks were supposed to be unstoppable fast, low profile, heavily armored, and terrifying in numbers. The math was simple. Quantity would crush quality. And according to Soviet war models, the Israelis should not survive the first night. But war does not respect spreadsheets. At precisely 2 p.m., the Golan erupted. Artillery ripped across the plateau. The ground shook. Then came the sound of engines roaring forward like a mechanical storm. Syrian armored divisions surged across the purple line. Tank crews were confident. They had the numbers. They had the night vision. They had Soviet technology. And across the ridges, Israeli defenses were thin, dangerously thin. Most Israeli reservists were home, fasting. Radios were silent. The odds were brutal. Yet as darkness fell, something went wrong. By midnight, reports reaching Damascus stopped making sense. Syrian units expected to be racing downhill toward the Sea of Galilee. Instead, they were stalled, burning, calling for help. A battalion commander's voice cut through intercepted communications. "We are being destroyed. We cannot see them. They are hitting us from the dark." Soviet advisors froze. That was impossible. Israeli tanks were older, Western, supposedly inferior. They had no infrared night vision. Yet Syrian tanks were dying accurately, systematically, at extreme range. Entire platoons were wiped out in minutes. The situation maps no longer showed progress-y congestion. One narrow corridor began filling with wrecks. Soldiers gave it a name: the Valley of Tears. By dawn, the scale of the disaster was undeniable. Hundreds of Soviet-supplied tanks lay destroyed, turrets blown off, hulls scorched black against the basalt rock. Soviet advisors searched desperately for explanations. Was it a new American missile? Secret NATO units? Experimental technology? But reconnaissance photos told a different story. The tanks killing them were Centurion stall, boxy machines designed in the 1940s. Relics. And yet, they were dominating. In one sector just for Israeli tanks, held back an entire brigade. Not through luck, through precision. Syrian crews described the same nightmare. Every time they activated their infrared sights, a shell struck moments later. They never saw the enemy fire. What Soviet engineers had praised as advanced night fighting technology had become a death sentence. You see, the Israeli tanks weren't seeing the Syrians. They were seeing the light. Active infrared systems required Syrian tanks to project invisible beams that glowed faintly red at the source. In dust, smoke, and darkness, those beams betrayed their position. Every Syrian tank turning on its night vision was silently announcing, "I am here." The Israelis simply fired at the glow. But technology alone didn't explain everything. The Golan Heights is not open desert. It is broken, steep, volcanic defender's paradise. Soviet tanks were built for speed and a low silhouette, but that came at a cost. Gun depression. As Syrian tanks advanced uphill, their guns could not aim down far enough. Israeli tank stole, and awkward on paper had far greater flexibility. They hid behind rocks, exposing nothing but their barrels. And as Syrian tanks crested ridges, silhouetted against the sky, Israeli gunners fired into their exposed undersides. It was geometry, not heroism, doing the killing. Then there was the human factor. Soviet doctrine treated tanks as expendable machines. Western doctrine treated them as fighting environments. Inside a T-62, crews were crushed into a steel box. Heat, noise, exhaustion, Heavy shells had to be wrestled into the breach by a tired loader. Inside, the Israeli Centurions rebuilt and redesigned crews worked upright. Ammunition was accessible, movements were efficient. The difference was brutal. A Syrian tank could fire 2 to 3 rounds per minute. An Israeli tank could fire 6 to 8. That meant fewer tanks could put more steel on target, and steel wins battles. When Soviet advisors finally inspected a captured Israeli tank, they expected complexity. What they found was simplicity. No computers, no autoloaders, no miracle electronics, just a British L7 gun firing APDs, round tungsten darts traveling at extreme velocity. These rounds didn't bounce. They punched straight through the sloped Soviet armor, the very armor designed to stop them. The T-62's greatest strength became its greatest weakness. By October 9th, Israeli forces were nearly gone. Fewer than 10 tanks remained operational in the sector. Syrian divisions prepared the final push. Victory was minutes away. Then, something unbelievable happened. Instead of retreating, the Israelis charged. A handful of tanks surged forward, fighting wildly. 2 exhausted Syrian crews. This didn't look desperate. It looked like reinforcements. Panic spread. The advance slowed. Ten River said, then collapsed. 1,400 tanks had been stopped. When the guns fell silent, the Valley of Tears was a graveyard. Over 1,000 Syrian tanks were destroyed. Israeli defenders were barely standing but victorious. For the Soviet Union, the shock ran deeper than the battlefield. Their doctrine had failed. Not because their tanks were bad, but because they were built for the wrong war. This battle proved a truth that still defines modern warfare. Victory does not belong to the biggest gun or the thickest armor. It belongs to seeing first, shooting first, and to crews that can fight longer. It belongs to systems designed for humans, not numbers. The Israelis didn't win with magic. They won with integration. A better gun, a better engine, better ergonomics, better training, and the courage to exploit every advantage. The Valley of Tears was not a miracle. It was a warning that numbers lie, that machines don't fight, people do, and that the smallest design decision can decide the fate of nations. In war, superiority is not built in factories alone. It is built where steel meets the human mind. And in October 1973, on the rocky heights of the Golan, that truth burned itself into history. If you want more real war stories, battlefield breakdowns, and hidden military lessons that history books don't explain, please like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more videos. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps this channel bring you deeper, more powerful stories of war. Thanks for watching.